Hello, I'm Graham and I hope everyone's having a great day, and welcome to a new series of tutorials I'm running for the Panasonic Lumix Bridge Camera range. Now, it's ideal for anyone with the FZ200 all the way up to the FZ2500. It's going to be more of a hands-on experience rather than a technical aspect, so I'm going to show you how I'm going to be setting up for taking things like landscapes, portraits and macro work, and hopefully we'll be able to go out and do some of this photography for you outdoors. Today, unfortunately, it's pouring down as usual in the UK. We've had some heavy snow showers recently, and again it's very overcast, so it's prevented me from going out. Plus the fact I'm only just getting over from a heavy chest infection, so hopefully that's not going to detract from the audio intelligence in this video. Now, in this first video I'm going to be shooting indoors, and I'm going to be setting up to shoot some flower portraits. Now, this technique is applicable if you want to do some macro photography or product photography. It's the same sort of setup. First of all, I'm going to set up my FZ300-330 back to camera default and then show you the settings that I normally put in the camera. So if you're following along with the series, if I select a menu option, then if you have got the same settings, then you'll find them in exactly the same place. These cameras are so programmable that if you change some of the menu options, if I select a menu option and you can't find it, then it's because you've got a setup that's different to the way that I've set mine up. So I'm going to first of all set this camera back to default and then dial in some of the settings that I would normally have on this camera, and then you can see the results that we get from the video. Now, this particular video is all around plant portraiture. I like taking pictures of flowers outdoors. It's a specialist technique. I'm not an expert by any means in this field, but I do like to capture flowers and insects in this sort of mode. I've learned some techniques over the years, and I'm hopefully going to pass some of those techniques on to you in this video. So we're not going to use any special lighting techniques. I'm just going to use ambient daylight, and at the moment it's very, very dull outside, but that won't preclude us from taking some good pictures indoors. Well, you can see my setup here in the conservatory to take this flower portrait. I've got the FZ300-330 on a tripod, and I've got my FZ2000-2500, which is now filming the sequence. So first of all, we're going to reset the FZ300 back to the camera default. And to do that, we need to go into the Tools menu, or that's going to be the spanner or wrench icon. Now, the facility we need is the camera reset. Now, a quick tip here: if you want to change the page numbers very quickly, you can use the zoom lever to go backwards in the menu or forwards in the menu. And the one we want is reset, and you'll find that on page 5 of 6. So at the top of the menu there you can see reset. Now we're going to completely reset the camera. So press menu set, and that will now take us into a sub-menu. There are 3 setups that we need to clear. So we answer yes to the first one. We answer yes again, and then finally for all the custom setups, which are the ones you've probably set up if you've been messing around with the camera. So you would finally say yes to that menu option. And now the camera's back to the factory default. So we now need to set it up to the way that we want to actually shoot with this particular camera. Now, these are only my recommendations. They're particular setups that I use for my general photography. You may want to customize these once you get a feel for how the menu works, but if you all follow along with the way that I set up my camera, then if I do make any changes in menus, we'll all be having the same menu options showing, and that won't be confusing in future videos. So the first thing I want to do is set up my photo styles, and they're in the camera icon on the first page. So here we see the camera icon, and that gives us access to these photo styles. Now, the photo styles only apply to images that are shot in JPEG mode. They don't affect any of the RAW images if you shoot in RAW mode. But I like to shoot in the JPEG mode. I really don't have enough time to process every single image in the RAW mode. I've developed a workflow where I use my JPEGs for most of my applications. If there is a specific shot that I feel I'm going to get better than the camera can achieve, then I will shoot JPEG plus RAW and then see if I can modify that RAW file to get better results. But in 95 or 100% of the cases, I'll be using JPEG for all the work that I shoot and show here on my YouTube channel or indeed in my photographic blog. So the first thing is a photo style. I like to change the way that this operates. in terms of you can set the sharpness and noise reduction. Now the camera tends to be a little bit aggressive in the way that it applies sharpening and noise reduction straight out of factory default. So you can tend to get some sharpening artifacts even with a default setting of 0. So what I like to do is just take that back to the -2 position. And it's the same with noise reduction. Now the way that Panasonic implement noise reduction is to apply a small amount of blur to the image. Now that blur gets rid of any of the fine detail that might be in the image. So what I like to do is turn off noise reduction all the way to -5. Then I can use my editing program to apply the amount of sharpening and any of the noise reduction that I might need in that image. So I'm going to set to -5. When you've done that, just press menu set and that will bring you back to the main menu. Now the aspect ratio will depend on the type of pictures you're taking, and I'm not going to set that to any particular one for a default value, and I just change that as I need to. Now for this shot we're going to be taking of the flower portraits. I tend to shoot these in a square format as most of the objects are square, so I'm going to set a 1:1 profile. Picture size, leave that at that largest size, and quality, leave that at fine JPEG. With the AFF and AFS, I would leave that set to AFS with the single area mode. Metering mode, you can leave that to a whole area. Scrolling through, self timer, we're going to use self timer, but we only need 2 seconds. And we leave all the other digital enhancements off. So eye dynamic, eye resolution, highlight and shadow, you can leave those off. Shutter type, you can change that to E-shutter if you wanted to, because we're shooting on a tripod and there's not going to be any subject movement. So I'm going to leave that to manual shutter in this instance. ISO increments, I want to use 1/3 because I want to get some finer control. Diffraction compensation, again, just applies some extra sharpening to your JPEG images once you start to get towards the f6.1 to f8 aperture. You can change that if you want and put it to auto, or you can leave it off and do any adjustments that you need in your post editing. Leave all the digital zoom and eye zooms off for this particular shot. Default color space is fine sRGB. Stabilizer we're going to turn off because we're on a tripod, but in general production, if you're not going to be using tripod, you need to leave that on. We don't need any face recognition, and that brings us back to the first page. The other things I like to change are in the custom setup, and if you just quickly scroll through those, we need to come down to guideline. I like to set that into the rule of thirds, so it gives me an indication of whether my camera is vertical or horizontal if I wanted to shoot landscapes, make sure that we've got a straight horizon. Center marker, highlight turn off. Constant preview, you can turn that on because then that gives you a preview of the amount of depth of field that you've got in your image. Exposure meter, you can leave that set on. Dial guide, that's an indication of what the particular dials will do. Okay, so that's the camera set back to the factory defaults and then set up to a couple of recommendations I make to enable you to get better images out of the camera. So we're going to set up to take this plant portrait. You can see it's a yellow plant, so I've chosen that blue background as the colour complement to give some interest into the picture. Now you can either shoot the plant with its container, or you can shoot, if you like, a head and shoulder portrait of it. So what I'm going to do is zoom in with the camera so that I've got just the head of the flower. I'm just going to adjust the tripod so we've got the image lined up to where we need it. Like so. Now that we set the composition that we want by changing the focal length of the lens and moving the tripod, etc., to give us the particular composition we need to look at the shooting parameters. You can see that I've set up for aperture priority, and most of my work I will shoot in aperture priority mode. We've also seen we've now got the standard photo style selected, with the fact we've got a addition there of a change to the sharpness and noise reduction. That's why the little plus sign is appearing on the standard icon. Now we want to change the way the camera focuses. At the moment it's set for the whole area method, and I want to change that so that we've just got one point which is going to determine the focus. And we can do that by using the direct focus method using the back cursor dial, and it's this one that's got the cross-shaped icon on the button. So when I depress that, it brings us up to the AF mode selection, and then I can cursor along until I get the one area method. Now if I wanted to change the position and size of it, we use the down arrow key. So if I press down, it allows us to change both the size and the position of the target. Now if we use the top control dial, we can change it to a small target or we can change it to a larger target. I'm going to set that down to a small target, and it allows us to change the position of the focus target. Once we set that to where we want the actual principal point of focus to be, just press menu set and that will bring us back. Now once we've set that particular size, we can actually use our finger on the screen to change the focus point to where we want it for this particular image, but the size will stay the same unless you change it with the menu option. So now we set where the focus point will be. When we half depress the shutter button, the camera will focus on that point, and you'll get a confirmation of that focus with a solid green icon and a beep from the camera. So they can see we've got a focus point, and you can see the camera locks on focus and gives us a confirmation by that green icon and the beep from the camera. Now in terms of what aperture to use, remember aperture determines the amount of depth of field. That's the amount of focus between the front and the back of your subject. So foreground to background distance, the amount of focus is set by your aperture. Now if you're shooting outdoors, it might be the case that you want to set a very shallow depth of field so that the plant is isolated against its background. You don't want the background to be competing in your image. So you can use a longer zoom lens setting and a wider aperture to throw that background wildly out of focus. Here in the studio, where I've got a simple plain background, I just want the foreground to be sharp, and we can afford to leave the back of the plant slightly out of focus if we wanted to add that little bit of interest to the foreground. So by using an aperture of f2.8, that will give us a nice shallow depth of field. Wanted a little bit more, I'm going to step through until I get to around f4. Now by using f4, I found this to be the sweet spot of the FZ300-330 lens. At that point the centre's sharp and the corners are sharp. Really with fly photography, it doesn't matter if the corners are unsharp. It sometimes helps to focus the eye down into the centre of the image if the outside area is slightly out of focus as well. But for this particular demonstration, I want to try and capture the image with complete sharpness. Now we set the camera 2-second timer up in the menus, but to access the drive mode we need to use the bottom cursor button to allow us to switch over to the self timer mode. So cursoring to the right sets it to the drive mode for the self timer, press menu set, and you can now see on screen we've got the 2-second timer. Now with the FZ300-330, that timer will stay enabled until you change it back to single mode. With the FZ200, unfortunately, each time you change it to a self timer mode, it will cancel at the end of every exposure, and you've got to remember to reset it. So by using that 2-second timer, I'm going to take this first image. Notice this is just on the table and no other setup. You can see my exposure is as the camera set it, so there's no exposure compensation. The camera is just determining the exposure directly from the way that it's metering the scene. So we're going to take that first picture, and we can have a look at that in the video. You can see that it's fairly sharp from foreground to background, and overall it's quite a nice picture. Now what I'm going to do now is to move in my reflector onto the right hand side of the image, and that will help to soften down any of the shadows that are on the right hand side. We've got nice definition on the left hand side coming from the window light, but we might want to just pick up the outline from the back of this flower by using the reflector on the right hand side. So I'm just going to move that into position. I'll move in this cardboard reflector to the right hand side, and you can see on screen that it's brought in the lighting to the right hand side to balance those shadows. This is just a piece of white card. If you wanted a stronger reflection, then you could actually use kitchen foil. If you are going to use kitchen foil, then it's better to crumple it up and then stick it onto your board again. That crumpled surface gives a better reflective quality than the plain foil, as that plain foil tends to give you too sharp a contrasty image. But if you've got the crumpled aluminium foil, that will give you a better result. So hopefully you can see on the image there that we've got fill of the shadows on the right hand side. So we'll take that shot again, and you can see that we've got more fill of those shadows on the right hand side. Now that's the basic technique for how I would take a flower portrait. Again, you choose a background to complement your particular flower. So I'm going to change over now to another flower, and we can take another portrait and we can have a look at that again in the editing, how we can manipulate this to give us our final result. Now for this second shot, I've actually included this little peony in a jar, and we're going to take a complete picture of the container and the flower itself. So I've just lowered the tripod a little bit to get into the center of the image. We don't want to be shooting looking down onto it, so the camera is at the center point of the image. Again, I'm using aperture priority mode. I've set to f4. This particular exposure is giving me 1/80th of a second. In that first sequence of images, I use the camera using auto ISO, and by looking at the EXIF, I can see that it shot at ISO 100, which is exactly what I want. For all my shots, I will use ISO 100. Very rarely will I use 200 or 400, as that tends to introduce a little bit of noise into the image. In most situations, you can get away with the lower shutter speed because of the optical image stabilization, or if you can't, try and get the camera onto some stable surface. Either you lean against something or put your hands underneath the camera on a wall or something like that to stabilize the camera. But generally I tend to use ISO 100 for every single shot that I take with these smaller sensor cameras. So I've now set ISO 100 by using the ISO button on the four-way navigation and set the camera to ISO 100. I also notice that I've set my increments of the aperture to be in 1/3 stop. So each click of the back control dial changes my aperture by 1/3 of a stop. So I've set back to f4. Again, using the single area autofocus, I can use the left hand navigation button and then down to the area so that I can change its position, or I can use the touchscreen to set the point of focus. So again, I want to be on the front surface of the flower to make sure that I get the amount of depth of field. Again, using the 2-second self timer to take the picture. You can see we've got a nice picture there. The shadows from the light falling on the left hand side of the image are being cancelled out by the reflector onto the right hand side, and we've got some good definition of highlights on that glass to show that it's a spherical surface. We can actually see the highlights on the left hand side and the right hand side, so that jar is defined by our lighting. Well, this is an extension to the today's program where we're going to edit one of those images. I'm using a program called smartphotoeditor, and smartphotoeditor has been developed by a company called Anthropics, and you can find more details of this at their website, which you can see on screen at the moment, which is smartphotoeditor.com. In the UK it's $19.99, but if you look at the website there is a 10% discount at the moment, so you can get that for $17.99. I'm going to open up one of those images that we shot today, use File Open, and go to my memory card, and I'm going to pick the image where we had the reflector in place. So I'm going to bring that image into the editor program. So that's the image from the camera that we saw. We've got basic adjustments we can make to the image by using the image treatment button on the right hand side, and you can see we bring up a whole dialog of display items we can use here. We can use exposure, brightness, highlights, shadows, clarity, saturation, etc. I'm just going to bring up the clarity a little bit to define the edges of that image. So I just brought the clarity up a little bit. If I thought the shadows were a little dark still, I could just bring those up a little bit. Like so. Now remember, in the basic photo style setup, I have noise reduction down to -5 and sharpening down to -2. So I'm just going to apply a little bit more sharpening to this image. And to do that, we use the area treatment. Once you click area treatment, it brings up another set of controls, and by default you're using the whole of the image, but you can actually use a mask if you wanted to. You can actually make a mask to outline the areas that you wanted to apply sharpening to, but I'm going to apply it globally as the background is plain and it won't suffer in any way. So I'm just going to add a little bit of sharpening. If you go too much, obviously you'll see the halos and sharpening artifacts, but that's a little bit too strong. I'm just going to back that off a little bit to about there. Now I'm happy with that image, I'm going to apply an overlay to it, and this program is fantastic for those overlay techniques. If you go up to the right hand side, you've got the effects gallery. Click that and it brings in a whole list of effects. There are 508 pages at the moment, and all these have been generated by a user community. So once you get into the hang of using the editor, down here there's an effect editor program which allows you to create your own effects. But for this program, we're going to look at using one of the artistic modes. So you can use watercolor, oils, ink, pencil, crayon. You can select any one you like. So if you go to watercolor, it will then refine those down to the effects that have been designated as watercolor. There's one I want to use in this particular image, and it's one that I've used before. It's called Selena Drained. Now if I bring that in, you can see that it totally desaturates the image, but puts this nice blue background. Now if I didn't want this effect to apply to the actual plant itself, I just wanted that background from that image and the desaturation in the stems, I'm going to apply a mask. And to do that we use the mask area. So clicking on mask area brings up a whole new dialog which allows me to define the mask. Now you can use a hard edge or a soft edge, or you can use an airbrush. So I'm going to use the hard edge first of all. When you first of all click into the image, you'll again get the mask display options. Now I tend to use the black one, so it allows me to see where I'm actually putting the mask. Up here you've got two controls, which is size of the brush and the actual detector size within the middle of that. So you can change the size of the detector to a slightly larger one, like so. Now I can go around the outside of the image, and I'm going to do this fairly quickly so it doesn't take too much time in this editing. I'll go around first of all quite quickly around the outside edge. And you can see this works quite well. I would like some of the other photo style editors to work the same way, such as Photoshop. This is fantastic as a quick way of getting around and applying a mask. So we'll go around the outside of the flower. I'll change the brush size in a moment to go into the smaller areas. So keeping the inner circle away from the outside edge allows it to trace around the outside of the image. Now I don't want to go over the glass, I want to keep that glass the way that it looked with that desaturated image. So now as I've gone round it, I've got the option there to fill that central area in. I'm just going to change the brush size using the left bracket key, so it allows me to go smaller. And I'm just going to go in and fill some of the finer points of the image. Again, you could do this with a lot more finesse than I'm currently doing with this image, but the actual image itself lends itself to this particular background, so you don't really need to be that precise in applying the mask to these finer areas, but I'll do it as best I can in the time that I want to spend with you at the moment. So let's just fill some of these finer areas in. Just a clump there, and finally these two petal shapes here. A little bit there. Right, now, as I say, you could spend a little bit more time defining your mask to make it perfect, but once you've defined the main areas, you can go to view the effect, and that is the right hand icon here. So when you view that, it now shows you the whole of the image with the mask applied. Now you can see here we've got a problem. We've got part of the image which is showing through to my original background, and I don't want that. So if I just add to that mask selection, I can go over that small area and apply the background to that point. If there was any other areas of the image that looked suspect, then again you could either add them or subtract them from your background. That's looking good. I just want to apply now a frame to the image, and again using the effects gallery you get the option to select borders: classic, vintage, contemporary. Now I'm going to go for classic because I know there's one in there which has got a blue plastic background. I think that was on page 2. Yes, there he is. So I'll now select that background. You can see that it's applied a frame appropriate for the type of image. So I've got a square image, it will size it appropriately for a square image. Obviously a horizontal or portrait, it would do the same. There is the padded area, and that's this white area between the image and the frame. So if I wanted to add a little bit more padding, then you can add that at this point of the program. When you're happy with that, just click on OK. And for the final touch, I'm going to add a signature. Now you could do that using the text and just type it in, or you can then create your own signature and have it in one of your presets. So I've got my signature as a preset. Then I can just locate it on the image where I want. If I wanted to make that a little bit more pencil-like, I could fade that down like so, and that would be the image complete. Final thing to do is save that. Save it as a JPEG or a TIFF or a PNG. Save it with the size you want or the quality you want, and then it will save it in the same folder that you've already got this assigned to. So if we call that new image, and we save it, it will save it into that folder. It's quite slow to render while I've got the screen capture program running, but normally it's quite quick to render these type of images. So check it out on the www.smartphotoeditor.com website. So there is a 10% offer on there at the moment if you wanted to purchase this. It's a fine editing program for just basic editing, but all these special effects for applying frames, etc. It really is intuitive how to use the program. And that's it done. So if we just go into the Windows viewer, file viewer, and if we went into the memory card, we've got the new image, and that just opens up in Photos. You can see the effect. So that's what done in 10 minutes, and if you wanted to spend a little bit more time, you would get a better effect on the image, but that doesn't look too bad for this presentation. Well, that's it for this short video tutorial. Hope you learned something in that. Now, if you're a new viewer to this channel, please do click that subscribe button and then click the bell notification icon, and then you'll get notification in your YouTube list when I've uploaded the next video in this tutorial series. Also, check out my photographic blog. You'll find lots more information, and there's the invitation there to join my fortnightly newsletter. Now, that newsletter is more than a newsletter. It's a full technical publication in many respects, stuff that I don't publish on the photo blog. So do subscribe to that if you've not already done so. So again, thanks very much for watching. Until my next video, please do take care, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye for now.